Welcome to today's episode of A Facilitator's Journey, brought to you by School of Facilitation and me, Kirsty Lewis. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Richard Stokes of Mojo Development. He is a coach, he is a leadership facilitator, he has direct clients, he's an associate. The core topic, though, today is going to be about decision making and how do we make decisions consciously and unconsciously in our businesses. So I hope you enjoy it. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. If it's something you do like, please remember to subscribe, like, follow, whatever the method is. Enjoy this episode. Okay, so welcome to this podcast episode, and I'm joined today by Richard Stokes. Hey Richard, how are you?
I'm very well. It's so good to be here. So good to see you, Kirsty.
And to see you too. So for the listener, how do we know one another?
It's a really good and important story for me, how we know each other. It is essentially through my podcast, the Mojo Podcast. But before that, we were having a kind of an Instagram kind of bromance we talk about, don't we? We're sort of like following each other and checking out what we're doing. And, I was following a lot of your guidance and tips on being a facilitator because I was fairly new into it, I think, at that point. And then I'd kicked off my podcast and I was in the first season of it and really stepping out of my comfort zone and approaching people I didn't know to be guests, because that's how you get guests often, to expand your network. And I remember messaging you and with that real fear in my head, like, what's she going to think? Who am I to ask Kirsty to be on my podcast? And you were like, straight back, love to do it. Yes, that'd be awesome. And this was, I think, I'm going to say 2020 before COVID, I think.
Yeah.
So we got to meet in person in a studio in Soho, and we sat down and had this most fantastic conversation about your journey to where you'd got to, which I found super inspirational. It was about values, I seem to remember. And we talked about values a lot. And we went from there, didn't we? And the wonderful thing, I remember distinctly, we didn't just have that conversation, but we sat down and had some lunch after. And you said, I've got to introduce you to a couple of people you're going to want as guests. And that was Barry and Richard. And then they became guests. And guess what? They both introduced me to more people. And this wonderful snowballing effect of the network, of the community carried on. So it's through a podcast. It's so important. Yeah.
So important, community, especially when we work for ourselves and we have, but that solopreneur. So how long have you worked for yourself, Richard?
So it will be 5 years this November when I incorporated Mojo Development.
And how do you describe what you do?
I'm a leadership coach and workshop facilitator. And it's through the lens of leadership where I come at it from. So it's one-to-one work with individuals, sometimes group coaching, and also facilitating larger groups in the room, and obviously in the last few years a lot on Zoom as well. So very much leadership from a point of view of personal development, the inside out job of leadership. That's how I come at it. Yeah.
And for context, how are you direct client? Are you associate? Is it blend? How do you describe the way the work comes to you?
Yeah, it's definitely a blend. And again, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd probably been like, I don't really know how this is going to work. Let's see what happens. But I was fortunate enough to have a few direct clients to kind of kick off with, and I got an associateship very early on as well. So I sort of stepped quite naturally into, I'll go and find my own clients, but also I'll work with, let's call them an agency who are going to bring me in. And it just felt very natural, actually, from the get-go, to have that, as you say, that blend of channels to market.
That's a nice way to say it. It's a blend of channels, and it's okay to have one channel, two channels, three channels. And if whether that's you have your own direct clients, you work as an associate. What else could there be? Fixed term contracts, like semi-permanent contracts as well. It's another one I've heard. And I think for many of us starting out, I was an associate when I started. It felt safe for me. I wasn't too sure what I was going to do. So being an associate was the way forward.
Yeah, and I get that. I think I'm sure if that had been my first thing that came towards me, I probably would have gravitated maybe solely to that. Who knows? But I did have, one of the reasons I stepped out of corporate and set up Mojo was I really wanted to do something for me. I had this big itch to scratch. So I think that this whole kind of going and finding the clients, and actually was quite aligned to some roles I'd done previously in the ad agencies I'd been in terms of around business development. So I was quite comfortable around that. And I appreciate it doesn't come naturally to everybody, the whole sales and marketing piece. But yeah, so for me, that bit blend started me off and continues to fill my cup.
So the topic we were going to talk about today, it's quite niche and I quite like it. It's around decision making and how do we make decisions in our business? Because probably without even realizing it, we're making decisions all the time. And I was thinking about this morning, when we're on our own and running our own businesses, often we're making decisions on our own. Whereas when we were in the corporate world or in an agency organization, many of us bounced ideas around and bounced maybe some decision making. And it didn't feel, for me, making some decisions in my business often feels quite a big deal. And I just love to talk about decision making with you. Where should we start? How do you decide whether to do a piece of work or not?
Yeah, I mean, I really increasingly I feel my way in, if that makes sense, to understanding whether a client, be it a one-to-one coaching client or a corporate client who's I'm going to do workshops with, feels right. What I'm trying to get away from, and when I say feel very deliberately, is thinking about it too much. Because when we're in our thinking head, and we spend most of our time up here, 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, a lot of them are negative thoughts. It's not always our best guide, our thinking mind. And you can get into that overthinking, it's a big name. It's going to be really good for me, but there's a few things about it I know aren't really right, but I'll just get over that. I'll rationalize. So that's why I try and really feel into it. And what I've developed for myself in that is really that I guess there are 3 feeling criteria that I have when I'm looking at a piece of work, and it's, will this work be memorable? Okay. Will it be compatible? And will it be valuable? And I'll unpack each of those if that's useful. Yeah. Definitely. So the memorable really kind of aligns to my personal values, and it's around it. Is this going to be fun? Am I going to enjoy it? Because you make the decision, you step out of your corporate gig, do your own thing. As you said, you make the decision for you. It's me who's going to decide whether we do this or not. So it's better to have a sense it's going to be enjoyable. And for me, that's going to be around, yes, fun. Am I going to be able to make impact and have impact either on the individual or the organization? So I really want to have that sense of, I'm going to look back on this work in a period of time and go, yeah, I'm really pleased I took that on. This is what came out of it. This is how I learned. Because, constant learning journey is the other thing about working for yourself, I think. So that memorable bit is super important. And not a million miles away from it is this sense of compatibility as well. And I think that's a values alignment piece as well. I'm looking at, let's say it's a one-on-one client. Is this person really open to change? Because fundamentally, working with a coach, it's really about, I'm here and I want to get to here. That's a process of change. And if there's a huge resistance to that, I'm probably not the best coach to work with. So I know we're not going to be super compatible. The same kind of from a corporate as well. Why are you doing this work? Why are you this investment of time and energy and money into your people? Is it to, tick something off a list, or are you really trying to move something forward in your business? Are you really trying to, again, make change, make shifts, have an impact? So I really want to feel that sense of a compatibility between us. And the last one, and certainly not least, is about this sense of, is it valuable? So there's a lot of elements to that. Obviously, there's is it of value to me? Yes, from a financial point of view. I mean, we can't duck that. We do work for ourselves. We have taxes and bills to pay. So am I being fairly remunerated for the work I'm doing? And I
Yeah.
you know, not to jump off subject, but I'm really pleased that you've launched your huge global survey into what facilitators and coaches are being paid. The is a pricing survey you've done
Pricing
recently.
survey,
Yeah, I think that's really, really important to shine a light, lift the lid on it a little bit. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
So there's that part of the value bit. And also, am I valuing myself? Am I looking at the work? Because we have a tendency, we can obviously get into that headspace of doubt. And am I good enough to do this work? Do I have what it takes to do this work? So I want to check in with myself that, I can do this work. I've got, it's going to be memorable. I'm super compatible. It's valuable to me and I'm good enough to do it. So there's lots of layers within it, but broadly I go through this feelings checklist whenever anything comes towards me. And so far, it served me pretty well.
And I remember I can see where I was in Battersea in London when you first introduced me to this decision-making filters that you use. And I found that it was really insightful because I was like, oh, actually, I think I probably do something similar and different. And one of the things we started to talk about was, how do you know when it's a yes and how do you know when it's a no? And do all three elements have to be in the package? And can we just have a look at that? So do all three elements of memorability, value, and compatibility have to be there?
In an ideal scenario, I would like all three to be there. So this very much is when I'm in my, the word I use when my mojo's high. I can be probably more selective. Things are flowing, feeling good, things are coming my way. Maybe I've got an option of this work or this work. Yeah. Work A, all three are ticked. Work B, maybe one is really a glaring omission. And then I can make that decision. And then I sort of, again, feel into that decision. So, again, when I feel in flow and things are moving the way I want them to move, I feel I can make that decision pretty well. I know if things are a little bit out, I might start to reach for it a little bit, grasp for it a little bit too much, hold it a bit too tightly. And that's a sign. And, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm so purist, I would never take that sort of work on. I absolutely have. The interesting thing is I know afterwards, I look back and go, right, what happened? I knew that was going to happen because it didn't actually tick all my three boxes. So,
what does that feel like for you when you've said yes to a piece of work? And as you were saying, yes, probably part of your psyche was just going, I don't think we should do this, Rich. Yet probably it can come from a place of scarcity. Sometimes we're like, sugar, there is a lot of open space in my diary. What if I don't say yes to this work? Will anything else come along? So I know in the early years, I used to say yes to work because I was just worried. To your point, how was I going to pay the bills?
Yeah.
And then I did a piece of work and I'll be like, oh my God, this isn't right. I'm not enjoying myself. It then felt really torturous, or for me, it felt like hard work, and it shouldn't have been. Have you had that experience yourself?
Yes, it's happened. And the way I guess I look back and rationalize it a bit to go, okay, I'm 5 years into this. I haven't been working for myself for the 25 years that I had, in corporate. So I'm learning all the time. It's all information. So the other side of it is not to beat myself up too hard. Okay, I know I took that on and one of the three was missing. Say the compatibility piece was missing. And yes, it was a bit like this with the client at times. Okay, that's
it's okay.
It's okay. It's just information.
It's a learning.
Yeah. It's not that I again devaluing myself. It's a learning for the future. And then again back to decision making as our subject. What's my choice next time? Yeah.
I'll name something that happened for you and I. So we were working with a particular client and I found myself using the language of, I think I need to divorce them.
Mm.
And I've never used strong language like that before. And I felt a bit wrong, but it was actually a truth. And you were brilliant. You were part of the team who was doing some delivery for this particular client. And I look back now and there was just a mismatch. And so that compatibility piece, and the mismatch was cultural. It was a cultural mismatch. And what I didn't do was listen to my gut instinct and name it earlier. And I should have said, it's time to say goodbye to that client, and do it in a way that was graceful. And I owned it. What I did was, and this is just talks to me and the inner work that I need to do, we let it drift with belief that the client was going to come back to us, and they ghosted us. And that became quite a challenge. So they would never reply to emails. And I think my big learning is, when I have that inner sense next time, to either have the big girl conversation with the client straight away, or say no. And interestingly, I've just said no to a piece of work with a board of directors because it doesn't fit. It's not compatible. I know we could do the work and the team would be brilliant at it. It just does not feel right and in my sweet spot. And it's a really sizable piece of work. And that also makes me feel a little anxious, because I'm like, oh my gosh, we're talking 6-figure project here plus. And I'm like, wow. And yet I think if I went forward with it, it would become sticky and not as enjoyable as other projects that I could do in the future.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're choosing where to put our energy and attention, essentially, aren't we? That's and through that, it's a big, as I say, it's a big call you just made, but you're now navigating your energy and attention to the areas that would tick whatever your criteria might be. As hard as it is, and it is a big call, and I congratulate you for it. But it's
we'll see what happens.
But it's almost this law of that you're putting out a certain resonance. Okay, you're saying this is not for me, but this sort of thing is. And again, there's something 5 years ago I wouldn't have been using this sort of language, but the universe really does listen to the energy we're putting out there, saying this is not for me, but this is, and you'll call it in. And you'll call it in. Yeah, absolutely.
When we were talking before today, we were saying, how conscious has our decision making been in the past and now? And I'd love to talk with you, because we were talking about going from the unconscious decision making to the conscious.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit what that means to you?
Well, for me, this is the game. This is the work. If anything, it is opening up our consciousness more and more, to go from a life where we're almost operating on autopilot just to get through, because we've got so much in our day, demands and stress and maybe anxiety, that I feel this is how I kind of put definitely my corporate existence. You sort of I had to not think about that stuff and just operate on autopilot and deal with a smaller amount of stuff in a very conscious way, whereas now I think really if you doing the inner work, understanding self more, what you're doing is opening up your consciousness more. So you're just operating from a position of understanding yourself, fundamentally yourself better. Who am I?
And how does that help you when you're making decisions, though?
I think because it comes from a position of your true self. Because I know decisions I've made in the past, certainly, where who am I making that decision for? Is that really for me? Or am I giving it some color around, I think this is just the right thing to do? And certainly, as you talked of, when you're making decisions in a corporate sense, you're making it in the round, in a group, perhaps not in a position where you're thinking about the direction of your business, but a wider business. So it's a sense of, it's not really about me, and not really getting to the heart of what I'm about, and certainly not showing who I'm really about. I've worked in a lot of lovely companies, but if I said I was fully emotionally safe and able to be fully vulnerable, Probably not. Because there is this sense of, what do they think about me? What's this going to mean for me in my career if I happen to say this thing or make this decision? So does that make sense? Yeah. Well, I think this is kind of the game, really. This movement from living life in a fundamentally unconscious way to becoming more conscious about everything, and obviously decision making is part of that. So a sense of I reflect on my life, so in corporate, if you like, my pre-Mojo life, and I know I was making a lot of decisions, kind of mostly on autopilot, all the time. And this was a lot of context behind that. I think just a lot of stress and pressure of being in a big job and sort of feeling the weight of that and not really knowing myself terribly well.
Yeah.
And that's really
Yeah.
the piece. I think when you start to move from the unconscious to the conscious, it's just getting a sense of who you are and being really comfortable with that. Right, the whole embrace your weird, which I wish more corporates would do with people, rather than trying to put people into kind of little boxes. And obviously, just being yourself is a great way of just that self-expression. And when you're in there, your opportunity, I think, to be more conscious is just significantly greater.
And how has that helped you from a decision-making perspective in your business?
When you're in the unconscious, I think what you're allowing is the ego is taking over an awful lot. Okay, so you should do this work because it's a really prestigious client, and then part of me is going, yeah, but it just doesn't feel right. Yeah, but Richard, it's a really prestigious client. Think about having that on your creds, but there's something about it that's not sitting well with me. This is the inner dialogue that we're kind of having. So I think when we're moving to that sort of the conscious piece and the ego start to matter a little bit less, ego really coming from that position of lack. And when we're more conscious about ourselves, we're more, I'm good, I'm lovable, I'm valuable, I'm good enough as I am. The whole, I'm not sure I actually need this client in my life because there's something about it that's just not feeling right for me. And again, the other bit of that consciousness is I talked a bit about before. It's when we can come out of our head and operating in up here all the time, where the ego lives, come into your body when you just know. I bet when you turned that client you were talking about away, you knew first, probably in your gut, before you started getting into what the ramifications of this. Was that the case?
Yeah, true. I often feel it I've learned, feel it in my body. And I agree, when I was in corporate world, I lived in my head because I wasn't encouraged to use my gut instinct. Or if I did, I would just go, it just doesn't feel right. And it'd be like, no, you've got to go via your numbers. You need to have concrete data and information to be able to make that decision. And I'd be, yeah, but it just doesn't work. And it'd be like, no, that wasn't valued and it wasn't given a space or a place. How have you developed listening to your unconscious more and using it as another resource?
My conscious.
Sorry, listening to your conscious, yeah. Or evolving your unconscious, probably, to help you listen.
Yeah, well, I think it is an evolution, absolutely. And it's the more that we can, sort of sit with ourselves, and the more present we can be. This is where I think it comes from. Again, I think about being more unconscious pre-Mojo days in corporate, just so tied up in things. There was no presence. Everything was at speed. So it's very hard to listen, that being the point. When you slow things down and you get really present in your body, I think that's when you can tune into things more. So for me, it's been, part of my journey has been learning to meditate. So 7 years ago, I learnt Vedic meditation. That's my particular practice. Wow. And that's, 40 minutes a day, 20 minutes each time, meditation. And that is an amazing thing for slowing an awful lot of things down, getting very much into your body. And then you just have an ability just to tune in to things, and increase your consciousness, I would say, more and more. So the meditation, really, really important for me. Other things, a simple thing like getting out into nature, I find really, really useful for that. We're very disconnected from where we come from, which is the natural world. And obviously, yes, living in cities, that can be a bit harder, but there are parks and there are ways of accessing nature, which I think really helps just ground you. And you've got a big decision to make, I'd say get into nature, go for a walk.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's not about overthinking it, but let it play a little bit, and then see what comes to you. So, a big part of, my big decision that my wife and I made several years ago was to move from London to Ibiza. And the big part of that was the natural world, the natural environment that we wanted to exist in. And we chose here.
Nice. And what else so we've got meditation, we've got nature. What else have you done to help yourself?
Looking for good people in your life as well, looking for guidance. Again, I go sort of the pre Mojo years of I didn't trust people terribly well to come close to me. And it's not about necessarily giving advice, but just have a mentor to sort of play things off with. And then, guess what? I was lucky enough to have a couple of coaches when I was in the corporate world and thought, this is a bit different. Someone they're not judging me. They're not telling me what to do. They're not saying, hey, listen to me, I've been here before. The encouragement was it's coaching essentially a journey of self-awareness, which is that increasing your consciousness. All right, so this is what I really think about that. This is how I feel about this decision that I'm making. So having access to coaches helped me actually think, this is actually something I think I want to do. This is really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And then ever since then, I've always had people in my life, whether they're formal coaches, mentors, teachers who I go to and I trust, just to help me with that, increased consciousness over time.
And I think as solopreneurs, when we work on our own and doing the work that we're doing as facilitators, trainers, coaches, doing our work with a coach or a mentor is so important, because as we started earlier saying, we're often doing a lot of this work on our own. Having other people to talk things through with is invaluable. But also, I call it, doing your inner work, because we're working with other human beings so much. I think we need to know ourselves to be able to sit with another person.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think to be in the privileged position, whether you're holding space for and one other individual or a group, knowing yourself and having done the work gives you, I believe, a much better opportunity for the people you're with to get into their consciousness and understand themselves more and make those leaps, right? Going back to, why I do this work, I want to see impact. I want people to get the change that they're looking for. And I think you give them a much better opportunity if you've done the work yourself. So, I see it as this is a lifelong journey now. It's not, I did a bit of coaching a while ago and I went on a retreat, job done. It's constant. It's constant.
Well, I was going to ask you, how long have you been doing we often call it the inner work. How long have you been doing your inner work for?
I'd put it's around 7 years, because it's when I started meditating. I think that was my first step in. And it was I say it's a step, it was a leap. It was huge. I was like, what is this? Obviously I had this image of meditators as people sitting cross-legged, going somewhere in the Himalayas. And it's so far from the truth. It's simply the practice of quieting the mind, get into the body, and just slow things down. And I saw such a big impact from that. That's why I've stuck with it. And I appreciate people can find meditating difficult and hard, because I think we're trying to do it really well.
Do it,
do it, exactly. It's just don't think about doing it, just be. It's like just be it.
What other practices have you tried on this journey in the last 7 years? Anything else that you can put in the pot for our listener?
Yeah, so I've done a bit of breath work. It's not something I do on a regular basis in terms of attending groups, but I've had some pretty big experiences with breath working. Feel, wow, how did I go there?
Yeah, same here.
And the reminder is, it's just talking about being. It's just come back to your breath. It's,
Yeah.
if there is one fundamental thing, it's the air that we're bringing in. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like probably a lot of facilitators, before I'm about to start a session, I'll feel nervous. I'll feel maybe a little bit anxious. So for me, it's like, okay, just come back to the breath, slow
Yeah.
things down. It might be a bit of 4-box breathing or something that I'll just do just to really settle, and then
Nice.
start. Because if you come into a session and you're kind of hyper, super anxious, you haven't dealt with that, you'll translate that to the
Absolutely.
people we're with, and they'll be all
Yeah.
kind of anxious and a bit hyper.
Agreed.
And that can take some time to settle down before you can start to move forward. So
Yeah.
that's what I try and do.
So we've got a bit of breath work. Anything else that you've done?
A bit of cold water immersion kind of sits alongside the breath work stuff. So probably about the last 18 months I've been cold water showering. Yeah.
Every day?
Every day.
How long for?
Not, it's not long. It's like you get some benefit after about 90 seconds.
Okay.
And again, all these things, it's if you put a lot of barrier in the way of it's hard to get to, or it's going to be difficult and painful, the chances of you of a human being taking it on as a habit is minimized, right? So how do I make this easy? So I was reading, obviously a bit of Wim Hof reading, and the suggestion is do your usual shower, where you warm water, wash, then you move on to the cold water shower to finish off with. Because before I was throwing myself into cold water. It's like, this is really unpleasant. So it's a bit of less of a shock for the body, but you're still getting all this benefit of getting this cold water down the vagus nerve at the back of your neck and all that sort of thing, and just slowing, again, that sort of process of slowing down coming into your body, and a bit of a dopamine hit from doing something that you didn't think maybe you could do. So I've embraced a bit of that.
Yeah. Anything else?
I mean, there's at a really fundamental level, it's what I eat. If we're gonna get really into it. So about the same time I learned to meditate, I became a pescatarian fundamentally. So I gave up meat, and just found again just a profound shift for me. And it's not. I appreciate it's like it's what's right for you. I think this is the important thing with this. And I just
absolutely
trying different things. And I felt better in myself.
Yes.
So when we feel better in ourselves, the day is going to unfurl in a more pleasant way, right? Than I was just having trouble, frankly, digesting heavy meals made up of meat. That was my challenge, and I didn't really know until I tried something different. So for me, it took me a while to kind of get to embracing some of the sort of different modalities and approaches, if you like.
Yeah.
And I just try things and see, does that work? Does that help me? And then you build it in. And then you build it into your practice. Nice. This is what I'd call, this is your daily practice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hear you.
And having a daily practice can be really powerful.
My practices, I guess, exercise is my big one that helps me do my thinking and decision making. So, but an active exercise. So that for me is my running, my swimming, my cycling. Yoga in the week, superbly helpful for calming the mind. And I still process. I'm sure if a yoga teacher could hear my head as I was practicing, they'd be like, whoa. I think they call it the monkey chatter. I also go to something called The Sanctum with Laura Beckingham and sit and drink tea. Right. And she has beautiful seasons of The Sanctum. So for 2 months of the year, different points in the year. So that's a tea meditation. And that for me is, that just works. It's slightly active, but very calming. And I think to your point, trying out different modalities is really helpful. And it allows us to have an experiment and experience, and knowing all the time, I think that why do we do all of this? Like the end point being, I think for me, it's just like cleaning up some of the clutter I've got going off in my head and just giving myself a fighting chance when I go into my workspace or I'm working with my clients. It sort of allows me to read the situation more easily and use that intuition. I'm sort of hovering my hand over my gut and my solar plexus. Like I can feel like I can read the energy, and it's just another resource, another decision-making tool versus just using my head and logic. So I think that's why I do all of that work. Because some people might be going, oh, well, what's the point of doing the inner work? How is that going to help me make better decisions? I just want to say it does. have a go, and because if you don't have a go, you never know.
Well, that's it. And that's the encouragement. Try some things. Give them enough time, and look at the results. Look at the results. What's the impact? What's the change that you're seeing? And like classic atomic habits kind of stuff. If you start to see that reward state you're going to put that back into your routine, and that's the habit loop. You're going to keep that going. Yeah, I see a lot of it. It's like it's like a scaffolding that you need in your life.
Yes,
and it's. The difference I see what I have now is I've chosen my scaffolding of what I want around me, this sort of daily practice, rather than having imposed. And
yes.
I very much see this as again, talking about corporate life to running your own thing. Corporate was very full of lots of structure, lots of scaffolding. Literally, you have to be on this meeting, you have to be here, you have to do this, you have to think this way even. And there's so much scaffolding that starts to constrict any element of flow that you might get into, versus build your own. So we all need some scaffolding in life, otherwise everything just kind of might flow a little bit too much. But then you've got, right, I've just got it. I've done my meditation today, I've done my yoga, whatever it might be, I'm just feeling it. I feel literally at my best.
That's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I love that. So we choose our scaffolding versus having it imposed on us, which many of us have had. But if you don't choose your scaffolding, it'll choose it for you, and it may take you into a space that won't serve you and won't be of use. Okay. As with all my guests, Richard, we've got some quick fire questions. Are you ready?
Ooh, I'm ready. I'm holding on to my chair.
Are you ready?
Here we go.
Okay. There's only a few. What advice would you give to someone starting out?
Firstly, I'd say do it. So if you're on that edge and thinking about it, I'd say go for it is the main thing. And whilst we all have naturally fears will emerge, come back to why you were thinking about this in the first place, and kind of grasp that truth and move forward.
Love it. How have you invested in yourself or your business to support you in moving forward?
Yeah. So I say fundamentally, most of the investment has been in me, as we've spoken to, whether it's learning to meditate, getting a coach, joining various online programs with other entrepreneurs to learn. So the investment really has been in me fundamentally, and that's made the biggest return has definitely come from that.
Is there any program in particular you want to call out that has been good for you?
Yes, I'd call out Bodhi Aldridge's Leadership Mastery program, which has been really fundamental to me, working with a group of other men, in this case, from around the world, all business owners, just trying to understand ourselves better so we can apply it to the business. So that's been really fundamental.
Awesome. Who are you paying attention to in social media land at this time?
Part of my challenge is I probably pay too much attention to social media, and I'm trying to rein it back a little bit.
Okay.
So it's really about where I'm trying to be more choiceful about where I put my attention. So rather than the sort of the doom scrolling, it's like where I'm getting things from. But where I get a lot of value from, to be frank, I get a lot of value from School of Facilitation, for example, and always have done over a course of a wide period of time. Where else? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think, I like things like the Daily Stoic. It's just, here's a quote and something that you might want to think about in kind of a different way. That kind of comes to mind. Other kind of podcasts who are on social kind of are useful for me. High Performance Podcast has always been a favorite of mine.
Love.
What Jake and Damien are doing there has been fantastic. Actually, I got Damien Hughes onto the Mojo podcast actually a couple of years ago, which is a real coup.
No way.
He was amazing. Yes, he was incredible. Very generous with his time.
How did I miss that?
It's on there, series 3, I think. I talk about sport.
Okay.
That's what the lens that we use to come at that. So, the various podcasts that really inspire me as a coach and a podcaster.
Cool. What book do you recommend to other people?
Oh my. I've talked about Atomic Habits by James Clear an amount in this, and I think it's really foundational kind of work to think about for self. what is it I want to bring into my life, and how do I make that habit stick, and what, the psychology of habit and all that kind of thing. And that's really fundamental. I always go back to actually the 7 Habits of Effective People, Stephen Covey.
Yeah, Mr. Covey.
I think it's the
First
Bible.
book I read.
Yeah, I think it's the Bible. It's just behind me on the shelf here, and I'll often find myself going back in. Here's some notes that I've kind of made as I've gone. So I keep on coming back to him.
Nice. That was my first. That was the first self-development book I remember reading and getting a notepad and pen out and writing notes. It was in 1999. I know exactly where I was, and I've still got the notebook, so I remember doing that. Richard, thank you so much for being my guest today. If you've enjoyed listening to Richard and I chatting, Richard also has a podcast. It's called the Mojo Podcast, found on all good providers. I really recommend go find him. And also on Instagram. How can people find you on social media land, Richard?
Yeah, on Insta, where I'm trying not to spend too much time, but only quality time, is at Mojo Richard. And also on LinkedIn, you can find me, Richard Stokes, on there, or Mojo Development, the business, on there. And I like to share my observations around leadership, around personal development, that I hope people will find useful.
Cool. Richard, thank you for today. It's been interesting. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing your insights.